Before we begin, here's a brief introduction to our speakers. Leading today's session is Katie, a product owner who was previously a senior implementation consultant at Aptem. She joined Aptem after holding senior roles in curriculum and quality. Katie helps customers align their delivery models with our system. Her strategic approach and attention to detail have driven strong implementations and long-term adoption. Supporting today's session is Lou, an implementation associate at Aptem. Before joining Aptem, she held senior roles in quality and compliance within apprenticeship delivery, with a strong focus on creating practical, scalable approaches that support providers through implementation and ongoing delivery. And now it's over to you, Katie.
Thank you very much, Zoe. I'd like to just say, as part of me and Lou being on this webinar, we were both Aptem customers. So a lot of you that are on this call, we have sat where you are. So we have probably an intrinsic and extrinsic understanding of where you guys sit in the wonderful world that is apprenticeships. So a few things that we're going to be looking at today is what problem we're actually trying to solve while you're on this webinar, a little bit of feature walkthrough, which will include some live demonstrations, some key considerations and tips, some potential next steps for you guys to go away and think about, and some resources to support you with that. And then we'll have a Q&A. And as Zoe said, please pop your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try and answer those at the end of the webinar. And if we can't, we will put them as part of the Help Centre articles. So why are we here? What problem are we trying to solve? What we tend to see is a lot of providers are tracking assessments and EPA across multiple tools, and where our registration and certification has traditionally been used for things like qualifications and functional skills, what we want to kind of show you is how you can use this functionality to support with not having that data spread across multiple things, spreadsheets. When I was in implementation, one of those things we were trying to do is get rid of as many spreadsheets for you guys as possible. You struggle with one single operational view, or you've got one spreadsheet that is shared multiple times across different links, and reporting can be kind of a little bit manual and slow. Now, I'm not going to solve every single one of your assessment trackings and EPA problems today, and there is going to be some manual things that I show you. There is some CSV imports that can happen along the way as well, and those are available to see within a different webinar, and I will highlight where those things are. So that's what we're kind of going to look at. If any of those things on that screen seem familiar to you, then you are on the right webinar. So we're going to look at a couple of things. The first bit is registration and certification use two levels, and it's part of today's webinar is to help you understand those distinct differences when you're doing your configuration. And the easiest way to think about this is your qualification record is your folder, if you like, and your assessment record is all the documents within inside it. So if you kind of think about that analogy as we're going along, hopefully that'll help you understand where we're going with this. So the qualification record looks at the statuses of whether people have been registered, that achievement, certificates being sent, helps see all of those planned and achieved dates. Also, you can log all your registration numbers, and it's that overall life cycle tracking. The assessment record, on the other hand, and this is the bit we're going to concentrate more on today of how you can set up your qualifications token for your assessment record. That's where you're looking at mocks, resits, dates, statuses, your grades, anything you like really on what you want to do for event level tracking. And that's why I said qualification record, your folder, and your assessment records are those documents that sit beside it. So, wonderful graphic slide here. There's kind of three ways that you want to look at how you can set up your assessment tracking. And I'm going to show you all these three in a demonstration, so don't worry about that. You have the simplest approach, which is just program assessment overall, person's registered, they've passed. That is essentially the simplest approach that you can look at. You've got a greater detail approach, which is where you may want to break down that overall program into the distinct different areas of endpoint assessment. So if you've got 3 elements of endpoint assessment, you might want to track all 3. If you've got 7, you might want to track all 7 plus your overall grade. So that's kind of your greater detail. The other one, which is the most flexible, but it does take a little bit more for you to kind of manage and keep on top of, is tracking the whole lot. And it's about tracking overall grades, all of those bits in between, plus gateway sign off, any internal readiness checks you might have, and also mock level assessment events as well. Okay, so there's kind of a very key distinction between all three of these approaches. And bear with me a second, because I'm just going to demo where all these three things happen. So on your tenants, you will need to be working in Classic, and you will be working within your programs token to begin with. Okay. Now, one of the things we would recommend is that you actually create this in a sub program. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't complete it in a delivery program, but sub program gives you a lot more flexibility, especially where in Aptem you might have one program that's got a version 1.1, 1.2 and 1.3 in it, because the assessment criteria within that standard has remained the same. However, there may have been a change to the endpoint assessment needs, and this is where adding a sub-program means you can still maintain your one delivery program for all versions, but know that your endpoint assessment tracking is slightly different depending on the version that particular learner is on. Okay, so you can do it in your delivery programs if you want, with the caveat that you may need more delivery programs, whereas sub-programs give you that flexibility. And those of you who are avid Aptem users will know the great thing about a sub-program is you can take it off and put it back on again if you kind of made a mistake. So we're going to go to create, and we're going to go to sub-program. And one of the things to remember is obviously giving your sub-program a suitable name. I am just going to call this EPA tracking example. Again, what I would recommend is you use your names that you use alongside your delivery programs. So this might be level 3 business admin or CSS, however you use your file naming standards normally, that's what I'd recommend you do. And again, you might want to put a description in there and use your tags. So I have a tag already called EPA. And again, if you want to add any more tags in, you obviously can as well. And again, that'll just help you with managing that process of it. Okay, version tags in your description, your names, all of that. Then you've only got to really worry about two tokens, which is our program requirements token and qualifications. Program requirements. Okay, there was a slight change in Aptem back end of last year about how sub-programs work in terms of against that practical period length. So it's just to remember for this here, if you've got a 12-month apprenticeship program and 3 months EPA, what you'll need to do here is put 15 in there. So whatever your whole period of your apprenticeship is, that's essentially what you will need to be putting in. Okay. Next, qualifications token, and this is kind of where all that magic starts to happen. So that previous slide, I showed you kind of 3 versions of how you could use that. I'm going to build them all here in this one qualifications token today, just so as we're going through it, you can see the differences across all that demonstration. So the first one we looked at is we just want to log an overall grade. And again, you saw on that slide, prefix, 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 prefix. Remember, part of what we're showing you today is reportable. Well, it's all reportable. And you need to be able to report on this in a meaningful way. So we're going to do, for example, level 3, customer service specialist, overall EPA. Now, again, you might have grade after that, you might have achievement, you can put whatever you want after that particular version. Okay. And again, you could put your 15 months in there. I'm going to keep it as 3 just because we know that that endpoint assessment period is 3 months, but it won't make a difference in terms of how we're setting up and using this. It's an external method and really, really important. We are doing this at qualification level. Those of you who use this for functional skills, for English, you're probably using outcome level. For maths, you will be using qualification level. So if you use this for functional skills, think of it as how you set it up for maths, and we're going to apply that one there. Now, you will get this warning that pops up that says this qualification doesn't exist, which makes sense because it doesn't have a qualification number. So the qualification doesn't exist in Aptem, so it's just warning you. Ignore it. We don't often tell you to ignore warnings in Aptem, but today we're going to. Next, what you want to do is, if you want to go through that more flexible approach, so that kind of middle box that we saw on those slides, that's where some customers just want to track overall grade. Others, on the other hand, may want to go, do you know what, I would also like to track. Now, forgive me because I can't fully remember all the customer service specialist endpoint assessments. So professional discussion with portfolio. Now, you don't have to go the whole way. You could just put PD. Now, again, it's up to you whether you want to put grade or anything like that. But again, it's our prefix that we're using to help us report on this further down the bus. Okay, and we're just going to apply that. Again, that warning will pop up. So just want to show you another version. So let's do level 3 business admin this time. And let's go everybody's favorite part of business admin, that wonderful knowledge test. And so on and so forth. So what we're building up here is we're building up a picture that you could log that overall grade, you could log the individual elements within that particular endpoint assessment cycle as well. Now, the third part of this is, I do see some customers using this, is you want a way to track gateway, and you might want a way to track all your mock assessments and everything as well. So thinking back to that slide, this is kind of that third element of that. So we're going to add our qualification, and this time we're going to put in, again, prefix. I almost forgot myself there. So let's go level 3, business admin, gateway readiness, for example. Now, I used to use the gateway readiness when I was an Aptem customer, and forgive me if I have any of my old tutors on this call right now, because they were terrible at scheduling gateway reviews, but this was really easy for them to manage instead. So it was a way to signal that I knew that customer, that learner was gateway ready, rather than worrying about whether a review had been scheduled. That was just their behaviours, not an Aptem behaviour. The next bit is, you might want to book in or check where your mock assessments are up to. So again, we're going to go level 3, let's go early years, and you might have an observation element, observation mock. Again, if you spell anything wrong, Aptem will underline it in a nice red line for you to tell you you've made a mistake, and you can just change that accordingly. And again, you might want to put that as internally assessed if you want to. So hopefully you can see from this how you're building up a picture of what it is you want to report on. Now, we will cover reporting further down in this session, so you'll be able to make a more informed choice on what is right for you as a provider. I see this one all the time. They just want to know that overall grade. Absolutely fantastic. Log the registration. Where did they get overall? The others is, I want to know that more detailed of each element within the actual endpoint assessment modules within itself. And then your full flexible, everything is, I want to log everything that's part of that gateway to endpoint assessment process, including my mocks. Once you've done all that, you're just going to confirm and confirm. Again, you're going to get errors because of potentially if you've got your ILR token and that's switched on. Doesn't matter in this element because we are purely using this sub-program for tracking our endpoint assessment. Now, the next thing you're going to want to remember, and this is something you might want to consider as part of your processes, is you're obviously going to need to add this to a learner. Now, I have some learners ready. Apologies if you're all going to have this in your head now. But if we apply this to a learner, what I just want to show you here is true Blue Peter style. I'm just going to put them on a delivery program. Now, if I put them on this program here, I just want to show you that this has been built in the delivery program rather than a sub-program. And I just wanted to show you that today so that you can see that working. And again, because that program requirements token was filled in correctly, again, you can see where all that start and end date pulls through straight into that. Okay. What I am going to do is I am just going to show you how to do this in console as well. So straight to our black-eyed pea, and we're going to add our program, and we're just going to pick one program that I prepared earlier. Now, obviously, normally your working hours and everything would be filled in. And again, don't forget our new standard feature version as well. And this is where you're going to add your sub-program. So this is where I'm going to add in my example program. And there you can see everything that we've just mocked up together there appears against that, just like you would add functional skills or particularly any other qualifications that you would normally. And we're going to hit enroll exactly the same way if you are using Classic for your enrolments. And there you can see all of that qualification data now sits against that learner. Now, hopefully that's helped you see the simplest approach, which is just that single line whole kind of where are they up to overall. The prefix where you can log the individual pieces, and if you want to look at any internal readiness, gateway sign-offs or mock assessment readiness as well. So we've had our configuration demonstration, but what does that actually all mean? How can you use this beautiful bit in a qualifications token to support you operationally? And this is where some customers do this completely different to others, and it really depends on the size of your team, the resource of your team, the level of information you want people to have access to. So the first thing is looking at what you would like your tutors and coaches to do. So you might want them in charge of showing that a learner is gateway ready. You might want them to be able to show that mocks have taken place. Equally, you might not want your tutors and coaches involved in this process whatsoever, which some providers do. My coaches did. The middle kind of ground is where we see a lot of exam officers, compliance officers taking kind of heed of this. We still have a lot of customers with larger quality departments, and sometimes the IQAs are taking part of this as well. Exam coordinators, those types of roles can really help you with this process too. So it's looking at, again, who's in charge of these particular elements. And then you've got your MIS and data teams, which will be able to use the whole qualification and assessment reporting, having a look at the overall pipeline. And again, do have one large customer whose data team it is who looks after this process that I'm about to show you as well. So one thing to think about as we go through today is who is responsible, who is accountable for which bit of this process. So back to the qualification record. This is where you're able to kind of track. Remember, this is our folder. So we're able to track as part of that folder if a learner's not registered, if they have been registered, if they've achieved their qualification, if that certificate has been claimed, received, and even sent. Okay. So again, those of you who are familiar with using this within functional skills and qualifications like diplomas, it functions the exact same way that you'll be used to using that for. It's just the wording that's different, essentially. So that's where this qualification record can really help you. And obviously, depending on what funding rules are released and when, again, there is still an expectation that learners are registered 6 months before their endpoint assessment is required. So again, this can help you track of who hasn't actually been registered for their endpoint assessment. When we start to look at the documents, so the assessment record within our qualification record, if you like, this is where the kind of this version of what we're showing you today really starts to come into its own, because this is where you can look at what's been booked, what's been maybe cancelled. So again, that's one thing that we get asked quite a lot by customers is, well, I don't know if something was cancelled, I don't know if the learner didn't turn up, something like that. This is all what we're showing you today that will help you track this data within Aptem. Okay, so again, you've got to look at if you want to have a look at if you're awaiting results. So if you're awaiting a result, you know that learner took that part of their assessment or their overall assessment. If they failed, you can start the cycle again because you'd need to rebook, then await for the result, etc., as long as obviously they're within that period of time required. And then that result has been passed and you can add the grade in against that learner as well. Okay, so just going back to my demo. So what it's important to note is we're in the learner profile here, but those eagle-eyed people among you will know that a registration and certification menu exists. Now there's an important distinction here is anyone can access this record within the learner profile because it sits within the learner profile and edit it if required. in order to access the registration and certification side menu, those people will need the manage reg and certs permission against them. So again, you can allow your tutors and admins to manage this at learner level if you want, but in order to actually see the data and everything that goes with it, you don't have to give them the reg and cert permission for them to be able to see this side menu. So again, you can support with what you do. Now, if they do have that permission, as you all know, the group structure in Aptem allows you to only see what you're allowed to see anyway. Okay. So I just want to show you, so we've got our black IP here, and we're going to go to registration and certification, and I'm going to start to just search for this particular learner. Okay. And I just want to show you this because some people panic when they see it, but what you can see here is this learner is appearing in the qualifications tab. If I go to assessments though, they don't appear. And I'm going to show you now why A, that makes perfect sense, and B, how this works within the system. Because our folder exists, but our documents don't yet because we haven't done anything to them. So what we can do here is I want to show that this learner has been registered for their endpoint assessment full stop. Okay, so for example here, I can hit edit and I am going to register this learner, pop their registration number in and the date that I registered them. So that is the simplest way to do this possible. Now you can do this through CSV import because your qualification number is essentially what you've done here. So those who've used your CSV upload for, again, qualifications and functional skills, it works the same way. And I did a previous webinar on how to use the CSV import function. Again, if you are using the full weight of everything, again, we've got a BA overall result. So again, that learner, pretend it's a different learner, is going to need to be registered. And again, we can put that registration date in and it will automatically pull through your achievement date. You have got not registered against everything else because they don't need to be registered for it. But again, if you want your data to be really clean, you could select the registration not required for that particular piece because they've been registered overall. Again, that is entirely up to you. Why I want to show you this is it may change the way you decide to set your qualification token up, depending on what you want to track and what you want to kind of use the resource to do. Okay. And again, the bit I love, I am a big nerd though, is I love that you can track when that qualification's being done. You can even track that your qualification, if you're still posting out certificates, for example, you can upload a copy of that and you can even pop your postal tracking reference in there as well. Data teams across the world are crying because of that function and how marvelous it is. Okay, so that's the kind of the qualifications bit. For the learner, we're going to go back to our black IP, and again, we can come into here and have a look at our learner profile. And this is where it really comes down to who you want in charge of this piece of the process comes. Imagine I am a tutor. As you can see, this is all updated perfectly well because I've updated it in another screen. But imagine I'm a tutor and I want to let you know that this person's mock observation has been planned in. I can come down here, add the assessment details in and just say, do you know what, boss, that mock has been booked, or thank you, IQA, that has now been booked in. And we can see that starts to build a picture. Again, if we want to use the gateway readiness scenario as well, I might want to let you know that I have booked their gateway meeting, for example. So for those of you who aren't using a gateway review or you want to use a slightly different process like I used to, that's where all of this kind of comes into play. Now when we go to registration and certification and hit assessments, it all starts to build that picture. Those documents are now going to get added in to that assessment level screen for you to be able to see. Okay, so that's where I just wanted to show you the difference there between those two things. If I go back to that learner, for example, I now want to tell you as a tutor that they have done their mock, and I want to edit that to tell you that that has been, I have received the results because I did the mock, they passed it, and I think they're working towards a merit. Again, that'll depend on your mock criteria and all of that you're doing. But again, just be mindful. You might want to tell your teams that are filling this in that they might want to use a capital letter or not a capital letter, or you might want to put percentages in there. Again, whatever you use for your functional skills and diplomas, for whoever, if you're using this part of the system, use that same kind of mantra that you're using. And again, I'm going to save that. Now, in that learner menu, I can see where stuff's been booked and results have been received. It's the same principle if you are using all of the individual pieces here. So you might want to show that that knowledge test was booked. You might want to then go, it was awaiting the result because that learner has done it. So let's just book that in the first instance for when that was due to take place. Again, I can edit that to say, because it was booked, I now have the option to cancel if that learner didn't show up, or it has indeed been cancelled, or I'm awaiting the result because I know that that took place. Again, I can now put in there that that result came through. And again, they passed their endpoint assessment for their knowledge test, and of course they got a distinction. I expect nothing less from our Aptem customers for everybody to be getting distinctions. So you can see here how that assessment history starts to build up, and I will show you reporting, do not worry, of how you can report on all this data as well. But again, every time that that assessment history gets updated, it will pull into your registration and certification assessments instantaneously to show that that starts to happen for that. And then it's the same principle for kind of everything else. What you need to decide as a provider is who's accountable for which bit. My tutors were responsible for it because they booked their own exams. We have customers, as I said, who exams team book all of that in, and they will control when something's booked, when the results are coming in. They will be the ones logging the grades and everything against those particular things. What hopefully you're seeing here is how you can build up that picture, and it's just that granular detail that you need to look at. Ask yourself the question, what do I need to know for that learner at a point in time? If you need to know if a mock has taken place, you will need to add that mock into that qualifications token. If you don't want to know that because you find it somewhere else, don't put that in your qualifications token, okay? And that's potentially, dare I say it, where your operations team and your quality teams might have to have a conversation between themselves to figure out who needs which pieces of information and when they need them, okay? When we come back to our reporting, again, there's kind of three ways that you can look at your reporting. You've got the in-system grid, which is what we keep going back to with that reg and certs slides. So you can, again, you can see the stages of not just if somebody's being registered, but again, where they're up to at that exact point in time. We have our OData tables. Now, what is really important to note is if you want the multi-line reporting, which is where you can see that whole history, you will need to use the OData tables to understand where they are. And that is your awarding body qualifications and your awarding body qualifications assessment history tables. Those are the two tables that you need. And then I'm going to show you, but you've got your CSV export as well. And as you can see across each of these, all of these areas are glorious pieces of reporting for everybody. The system grid gives you that overall team insight. Where am I at a point in time? The OData obviously gives you that rich audit history. Again, one of the questions always, are learners chronically turning up? Again, if you're using that cancel status, you can build up a pattern very, very quickly. And then you've got that CSV export, which I'm going to show you as well. So back into Aptem we go. And we're going to go to the reg and cert screen. So in the first instance, because obviously this is Aptem, I am just going to remove my learner's name from here, just so you can see all the richness of, yes, it's all test data, but you can start to see where people are registered and people aren't registered and all of that. Now, within the system grid, again, remember, you need the manage reg and certs permission to be able to see this in the first instance. Within this, you can use our filters. So again, you might want to look at a particular status. You might want to have a look at who's not registered, for example, for a particular group. Again, you can use all of your groups to know who to do. Now for operations managers, even IQAs among us, again, you can start to look at, I just want to see a particular coach because you might be getting ready for their caseload review, something like that. You can filter that down. Again, you can have a look at employer groups and even that name of the qualification. Within the assessments tab, you get a slightly different level of filters. So again, you can filter by sub-program. So again, that's really important because if you're using a different sub-program per endpoint assessment criteria set, that's really powerful because you'll be able to look at the differences across. And the one I really loved was the employer, because you could build up a really quick picture of which employers or which learners belonging to which employers chronically cancelled, and those sorts of things. And what's really good is you've got your assessment status and your results and your grade. Now, if I do have any quality heads, directors, lead IQAs on the call, this is all really powerful data for when I'm going to say these letters to you, you are putting together your self-assessments or your SARs and your QIPs, because you can report on all of your results, because you can report on all of your grades. Again, if you are reporting on, I'll give you an example. I noticed that for one of our level 3 qualifications, our learners were doing distinctions on professional discussions, interviews, portfolio-based stuff, but we're only getting passes within the knowledge tests. So one of the things I was able to identify as part of my self-assessment was actually improvements in my curriculum to get those knowledge tests up. And then that obviously came part of my QIP, and then that was really powerful evidence towards offset inspections and things like that. And as a direct result of knowing that my knowledge test results weren't as good as the professional discussion ones, I was able to make those changes and see those improvements live in the system. So again, don't just think of this as a reporting tool, think of it as that overall wraparound support for your quality, your self assessments and all of that as well. So how do I get this out of the system? So if you don't want to filter all your data in Aptem, you can, if you want, come to here. You can select everything if you want, or you can go down and select individual pages. Now, in order to export this out of the system, you do need the export data permission. So again, really important distinction here. You can give people access to the Reg and Certs screen, but you don't have to give them the export data permission to actually take stuff out. So again, you've got another safeguard there that supports you with that. Now again, I could just export that CSV. That'll pop out here. And again, I've just using the simplest of tables. And if you want, some of you are going to laugh. Some of you are going to go, Katie, that's really crude, but you know what? It works. I'm just going to stick a pivot table in. This is if you want to just learn how to use Reg and Cert and see what works for you. Again, you might want to, let's put the qualification name there and the grade in the column. Simplest thing. Now overall, if I want to report up to my SMT, I can see that I've got X amount, I've got 2 learners that have achieved their gateway. And again, you could start dragging down your statuses and all sorts. Simplest way. Absolutely simple for those of you who maybe aren't using OData but want to be able to get the richness of what's happening. I'm not going to save that. So that's just exporting it out. And as I said, if you want that full audit history, and I'm just going to remind you for purposes of the recording, what I mean by audit history is this. So if you want to be able to see it was booked, it was cancelled, it was booked again, it was awaiting a result, same way you do for functional skills, that's where you will need those tables in OData. And I will just pop those back on the screen for you just so that you can see those 2 tables that you actually need, which is your awarding bodies qualification and your awarding bodies qualification and assessment history tables. So we've had our little demo of our reporting. Key considerations and tips. So keep it simple. I've shown you many different ways that you could set this up, and You're probably sat there right now thinking it's quite overwhelming. What I would encourage you to do is start with the simplest of structure that answers your operational questions or your quality questions. And I'll go back to, what is it I need to see at a point in time? Okay. Overcomplicating it makes maintenance harder, and it will eventually make your reporting harder because you'll get lost in what it is you're actually trying to report on. Plan for existing learners. Again, the beautiful thing about doing this in a sub-program means you could use this now. Just remember, when you add the sub-program to them, that you'll need to put the start date of that sub-program the same as their start date that they actually started their apprenticeship. So again, if you want to guinea pig this with a cohort of learners to see what works, what doesn't, what you'd like to report on, this is the perfect time to do it, because that sub-program structure will allow you to do this. Review your role permissions. So again, make sure whoever needs to see that reg insert menu has the permissions to do it. And again, who has the permission to export the data, and just make sure that your access model matches your operational responsibilities. Okay. Plan your reporting route early. I am going to say it again for the people at the back of the room. What do I need to see at a point in time? Okay. That will judge on how you set up your qualification token to see where everything needs to be. Try and decide that at the start rather than retrospectively. But as I said, if you do this in a sub-program, if you've done a sub-program and you go, oh, this just doesn't give us what we want, you can take that sub-program off those learners and put a new one on. Just make sure that you're using your archiving of sub-programs correctly. Okay. Final bit. Those of you who have now suddenly got your phones handy, on screen are a couple of QR codes. Now, the QR code that is the Help Centre article, we have written an article that accompanies this full webinar. So please, if you want to go through all of what I've been through on a step-by-step basis, scan that code there, because that will take you to the full article, or you can just search it on our Help Centre if that's possible for you to do. And then we have a whole suite of registration and certification management, import and exports, troubleshooting guides, and assessment tracking as well. So if you scan the QR code in the middle of your screen at the moment, bookmark that, that will allow you to have that full suite of resources there. And as I said, one of the webinars that was previously done was how to use that CSV import and export functions. Just remember, if you're doing a CSV import, you need to do it backwards. So what I'm saying by that is, if a learner has passed something, you put that last. So do the CSV import on the order of events that happened, not the order of events that currently sit. Failing that, go and bother your customer success manager, because they love it when we tell you all to go and talk to them. If you are still in implementation, please talk to your implementation consultant. If you don't have a CSM, just pop in an email to hello@aptem.co.uk, and we will get right back to you for somebody to be able to support you with that. So, Lou, I'm going to shut up talking for about 17 seconds while I ask you, are there any questions?
We do have quite a few questions, to be fair.
I thought we might.
Lots of these, to be fair, can be grouped together, and there are some that are very specific to individual customers, so we will come back to you individually just to make sure you've got the right answers. A lot of questions sit around notifications, so just to sort of confirm whether or not people will get notifications when those components are signed off within the subprogram.
At this moment in time, there is no notification that says this has happened. However, I do love that idea. For the keen people among you who have seen Aptem Community in your Aptem tenants, I think that's a cracking one to pop into Aptem Community, and me shamelessly plug Aptem Community at the same time. At the moment, it just relies on you. How you do with some of the tracker menus is part of your admin behaviours is to go in and have a look just daily what's happened on reg inserts, or the same with your OData if you're doing an updated date from.
Fabulous. And I think that answers some of the questions that I've got about whether people need to go specifically into the learner profile. They can access it from there, but yes, as you said, the reg insert screen most useful for seeing the bigger picture of what's happening with all the learners?
I can see there's a question that's come in around, would you not be able to see this through the API with the awarding body? If you are using that area of the system, obviously yes, you can see all of that. If you are using, we have a API with Proefficient at the moment. For those of you who might not be aware of their brand change, that's EPA Pro. So again, if you are using EPA Pro, this might be something that isn't required. However, it's a really good way to get access out of the system if you're not using EPA Pro. Also, this would allow you to track that gateway readiness and mock assessments if you want to track that level of detail as well, but that doesn't give you as part of the suite there.
The other question that seems to have come up a couple of times is around kind of manually inputting data. Now, I know you've answered that and demonstrated that. Predominantly, the data is going to be manually input, and then you've mentioned the CSV file and where the recording can be found for that. Is there anything else you want to add around that?
Yeah, what I would recommend you do is, in the first instance, try this manually, as I said, with a small cohort of learners, just so that you can kind of check you've got your ducks in a row more than anything. Once you do feel confident, you can use the CSV import without actually having a sub-program attached. That is all available in that other webinar. And please, please, please reach out to your CSMs and implementation consultants for further information on that. And you never know, that might be a second webinar if we get lots of interesting conversations with that. But please refer to that other webinar, because that will go into that in a lot more detail, the differences between if you have the sub-program or you're just using the CSV import.
All right, I think that's all of our broader questions. As I say, the rest of them are quite specific to individual customers, so probably worth us going back to each of you individually to answer those.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your time today. Please keep an eye out for other webinars. Keep your eye out on our website. Keep your eye out on our newsletters that go out, our LinkedIn page, and of course, keep your eye out on all of our release notes for things that are up and coming. And as I said earlier, please, 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 you guys that are Aptem customers, you know we're constantly trying to improve the system. Go on Aptem community and get your ideas into us, so that we can work with you to make things better. Enjoy the rest of your day, guys.